In 2014, Congress considered an amendment from Democrats to repeal the free speech provisions of the First Amendment. I was at the time the ranking member on the Senate Constitution Subcommittee, the Judiciary Committee. I led the fight against it. Ultimately, that amendment came to a vote on the Senate floor, and every single Senate Democrat voted to repeal the free speech protections of the First Amendment.
Could you be more specific about what that vote was?
Sure, it was a vote that would have given Congress plenary power to regulate. The initial version was to regulate any and all political speech by anyone. It literally would have said any expenditure of money for political speech. So it would have said that if a little old lady went to Home Depot and spent $5 to buy a cardboard sign and a stick to say, vote the bum out, that Congress could make it a felony and put her in jail. It also could have given Congress the ability to criminalize union organizing. The Democrats realized that that version of the amendment was too extreme even for them, so there was a second version that Senator Durbin offered that limited its restrictions only to corporations. However, it had plenary authority to any political speech by a corporation. Now, I'll point out Paramount Pictures is a corporation, Simon & Schuster is a corporation, NBC is a corporation, the NAACP is a corporation, Planned Parenthood is a corporation, the Brennan Center is a corporation. Under the proposed amendment, Congress would have had blanket authority to regulate any and all political speech by any corporation in America. It was blatantly unconstitutional, and every single Democrat voted for it when it was voted on the floor. There was a time, by the way, previously when Democrats tried to repeal the First Amendment to the Constitution, the free speech protections, there were a handful of lions of the Senate that spoke out against it. Russ Feingold courageously spoke out against it. Ted Kennedy gave a floor speech saying, we haven't amended the Bill of Rights in over 200 years and now is no time to start. I gave a floor speech with a picture of Ted Kennedy behind me, nearly scared my father to death when he saw me on TV with Ted Kennedy behind me. But I pleaded, is there not one Ted Kennedy on the Democratic side who believes in free speech? There wasn't a single one. Unfortunately, with this bill, that is combined by the recent willingness of the left to engage in threats of violence and intimidation against speech they don't like. We saw that with Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots all across this country, with Democrat politicians turning a blind eye, that culminated in the current Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, raising money to bail out of jail violent rioters threatening fellow citizens. We saw it just recently with a leak of a draft decision of the Supreme Court and then left-wing groups publishing the addresses of Supreme Court justices and violent rioters going to the homes of Supreme Court justices, and the Biden Department of Justice refusing to enforce federal criminal law that makes it a crime to protest at the home of a justice. But our Attorney General Merrick Garland refuses to enforce that law, and the result of that, as we saw just weeks ago, a deranged man arrested for the attempted murder of Justice Brett Kavanaugh. That is truly a toxic stew of the current Democrats' unwillingness to protect free speech and willingness to engage in violence and threats of violence against their political enemies. What does that mean for something like the Disclose Act? Well, we saw in California in 2008 when there was a referendum on the ballot in support of traditional marriage, and a majority of Californians, bright blue California, voted in support of traditional marriage, and the names of those contributors were outed, and left-wing groups published their home addresses, and people got fired for their job for, by the way, contributing to what was then the political position of people like Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton. And yet people got fired for their jobs to daring to speak out. Look, the landmark case on this is NAACP versus Patterson. In that case, the state of Alabama, run by Democrats, wanted to target the people that were members of the NAACP. They wanted to go after them and persecute them. Sadly, it was the Democrats that founded the Klan, and they wanted to go after the NAACP. That case went to the Supreme Court in 1958, and the Supreme Court unanimously ruled that the NAACP, you couldn't force them to hand over their membership lists because it violates their First Amendment rights of free association. This Disclose Act is designed to target and harass speech that the left doesn't like. It is blazingly unconstitutional. I will mention something, though, to my Democratic colleagues. My time's expired, but I will say, if you want to see more disclosure, and if you think the current system is idiotic, and I think the current system of super PACs is idiotic, every year in Congress I've introduced legislation called the Super PAC Elimination Act. It would do two very simple things. It would, number one, allow unlimited individual contributions to campaigns, not corporations, not unions, individuals. And number two, it would require immediate 24-hour disclosure of any contributions. It doesn't ban super PACs, but as a practical matter, they would fade away because every candidate would rather control their own message rather than some.
Mark was abducted by China's Public Security Bureau while he was taking his family back home. A witness to the abduction has said that Mark was detained because Chinese officials wanted to view the contents of his cell phone. Mark was accused of being a part of a criminal conspiracy with 11 other individuals to manufacture and traffic drugs, charges that Mark has denied and which have been debunked over and over again. Chinese authorities tried to coerce Mark into confessing. He refused, and he pleaded not guilty in a trial that occurred in November 2013. During the trial, the prosecution didn't produce any forensic evidence to back up their allegations, and no drugs were found on Mark or in his hotel room. Records in Mark's passport show that he wasn't even in China during the time of the alleged offenses. And the 11 other individuals indicted in relation to this alleged drug conspiracy couldn't identify Mark. Nevertheless, outrageously, in 2019, a Chinese court sentenced Mark to death. Mark remains unjustly detained today. He is suffering in a Chinese prison right now as we speak. In prison, Mark has been kept in deplorable, abusive conditions. His jailers seek to break his will and break his faith. They have confiscated his Bible and his rosary. Mark's cell exposes him to extreme heat and extreme cold. He's deprived of sleep and subjected to physical abuse. He is in danger of high blood pressure, skin affections, and asthma. He's lost more than 100 pounds. His health is dire. Throughout all of this, Mark has been denied access to his family and access to American diplomats. Mark has communicated with his mother, and his mother has told me and told the world that the Chinese Communist government has failed to break Mark's faith, which remains strong. I spoke with Mark's mother earlier this week. This is a mom whose heart is breaking. This is a mom who wants to see her son again. This is a mom who wants to hold and hug and care for the son she loves. The treatment of Mark has been atrocious. So much so that even the United Nations has called on China to release him. The Working Group on Arbitrary Detention, a UN group of human rights experts who investigate cases of arbitrary detention around the world, found that Mark is being held in violation of customary international law and international norms, including the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. The world can see that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to use hostages and hostage-taking as a tool of statecraft. The Chinese Communist Party says they want to be taken seriously as a great power and a great nation, and they say they want to be respected on the global stage. But their treatment of Mark is not how great nations and great powers behave. Their treatment of Mark is how third world despots act. Madam President, I have drafted and this week introduced a resolution calling on the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist Party to immediately release Mark. I'm joined by my colleague from Texas, Senator Cornyn, and by Representative Cloud from Texas in the House, who has introduced the same resolution in the House of Representatives. This resolution not only calls for Mark's immediate release, it also condemns China for withholding from Mark access to his family and to proper medical care. Furthermore, it calls upon the Biden administration to prioritize efforts to secure Mark's release, both in their conversation with Chinese diplomats and in international forums. In a few days, Secretary of State Blinken will be in Beijing, and he will have distributing vast amounts of funding across the Middle East. Since 2015, the Brookings Institution that employs you has taken at least $12.5 million from the Embassy of Qatar. That's the amount that can be traced publicly. Just 4 days ago, the president of Brookings resigned in a scandal because he's facing an investigation for being an undisclosed lobbyist for Qatar. And he resigned because he said, "I know it is best for all concerned at the moment." Now, the president of Brookings has resigned over this, but you ran the Middle East Center at Brookings. To what extent did you participate in fundraising from Qatar?
Senator, thank you. I want to be very clear. I had no knowledge of any of these disturbing allegations regarding General Allen. I didn't discuss research on Qatar with General Allen. I did not do fundraising meetings for foreign governments with General Allen.
So did you know that your work was being paid for by Qatar?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so you knew you were funded by a foreign embassy.
Yes, sir. We had funding from several foreign governments, including the Norwegians and the Emiratis.
Well, the Norwegians and Emiratis don't work to undermine us, and they don't work to undermine Israel. The Qataris do. Did you participate in any way in the fundraising?
I participated in one fundraising meeting in, I think, 2012.
Okay, just a second ago you said you didn't participate in the fundraising.
Not with General Allen, sir. General Allen became president after I stepped down as director.
But you participated in 2012 in fundraising from the Qataris?
I sat in a meeting in which Ambassador Indyk was asking for a renewal of our grant.
Okay, you published a report with the Qatari Ministry of Foreign Affairs logo on the cover of it, correct?
Senator, we had a grant agreement with the Qataris to conduct a joint conference, which we did in Doha every year.
Okay, the president of Brookings just resigned over allegations that he was an unregistered lobbyist for Qatar. Did you register as a lobbyist for Qatar?
No, sir, I never conducted advocacy for Qatar.
Should the president of Brookings have resigned over this? Was he right to do so?
Senator, I cannot speak to what General Allen did or did not do.
Should the same standards apply to you?
Senator, the rules at Brookings were very clear. We received regular trainings on FARA compliance. I had no problem understanding the rules.
Should the American taxpayers be concerned that President Biden wants to put in charge of distributing millions of dollars of taxpayer money someone who has spent years being funded by a foreign nation who is not our friend?
Senator, I think my research and the research that I supervised was conducted with complete independence from all of our donors.
But it was funded by the
stands on its own
Qataris.
merits.
It was funded by the Qataris, and it just happened to so comply with their agenda that they put their damn logo on the cover, correct?
Senator, they did not put their logo on any of
You
our
put their
research.
logo on the cover.
No, sir. Their
Who put the
logo
logo?
is not on the research.
Who put the logo on the cover of the
Senator,
report you published?
The logo
Did you
is-
put the logo or did they?
Senator, we co-produced a conference.
Okay, so you both put the logo. All right, I want to shift to another topic. You know, the Biden administration claims to support the Abraham Accords. I got to say, your record on the Abraham Accords is stunning. It's one thing for your colleague, Mr. Ratney, to fund political campaigns against the sitting prime minister of Israel. But when the Abraham Accords came out, in September 2020, you tweeted that Arab leaders should not deepen ties with Israel until they saw whether President Trump won re-election. Why were you urging Arab countries not to deepen ties with Israel?
Senator, I was skeptical when the Emiratis made their announcement, which was breathtaking, in August 2020. I was skeptical that other Arab states would join them. And
You urged them not to.
I was proven wrong.
But you urged them not to, so they didn't follow your advice. But you wanted them not to make peace with Israel.
No, Senator, I did not urge. I was...
All right, you tweeted that peace between Israel and the UAE was a new Naksa, a setback. You also said it was a triumph for authoritarianism and just a normalization of men, which I don't know what the hell that means. Why did you actively lobby against historic peace accords in the Middle East?